More kids are experiencing eczema, food allergies, environmental allergies, intolerances, sensitivities than ever before. And Australian children are among the most affected in the world, yet families are still given the same limited solutions that mainly focus on managing symptoms. They can help in the moment, but they don't do anything to explain why your child's immune system is so reactive or what you can do to reduce that reactivity of the immune system. I'm hosting a masterclass sharing our natural approach for kids with eczema and allergies, how to soothe skin, calm reactions, and reduce flare-ups naturally. It's free to come along. It's online, and I'd love to see you there. You can click on the link in the show notes, or you can head to our Instagram profile. You'll find the link there over at Natural Super Kids. Or you can head to our website, naturalsuperkids.com/eczema-allergy-masterclass to sign up. It's free. It's going to be live. You can ask me questions. I'd love to see you there. Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello, Jessica Donovan here. We've been highlighting eczema and allergy topics over the past few weeks, and this week, if you're listening to this in real time, the first week of February, I am hosting a free online eczema and allergies masterclass, all about our natural approach when it comes to eczema and allergies. And honestly, we have been blown away by the response to this masterclass and these topics on the podcast. They've been really popular. I wasn't sure what to expect. I knew that I wanted to put something out that was specifically to help parents of kids with eczema and allergies, and the kids themselves, of course, because they can be pretty uncomfortable symptoms and conditions to live with, and they can really affect, daily life. The symptoms themselves, navigating things like allergies and eczema, it can be a real minefield. And I think one of the reasons that this topic and the masterclass that I'm running particularly has been so popular is because when it comes to modern medicine and pharmaceutical medicine, there is a limit to what is offered when it comes to allergies and eczema. Yes, there's a lot of great options for managing symptoms, things like antihistamines and steroid creams, and of course, food elimination, but it doesn't go much further than that. And I really want to spread the word to parents that there is more that you can do when it comes to your kids with eczema or allergies. And so in this podcast episode, I want to share 3 different stories of 3 real life families and children that we have supported either as a client in our online clinic or as a member in our Natural Super Kids Club. With different pictures when it comes to eczema and allergies, because all eczema allergy kids, definitely present differently. And while there are, certain patterns and certain commonalities, let's say, for example, with kids with eczema, we want to make sure that we are supporting skin integrity, for example. We know the gut microbiome has a really important role, but every child is very different. And when it comes to our approach, our naturopathic and nutritional approach to these sorts of issues, it's really important that we're looking at each child individually. We're not just looking at, okay, your child has hay fever, this is what you do. It's like, what is driving that hay fever in the first place? What else is going on? What's in that child's history that has led to their immune system being so reactive? Is it just that they have this strong genetic predisposition, or are there other factors at play? And I think by sharing these 3 different stories, it will help you see that every child, is different, and some of the common drivers that we see in kids that do have eczema and allergy symptoms. So I want to talk about a club member of ours. She also is a client in our online clinic as well. Mum's name is Jitana, and I want to talk about this case because it is a really interesting one. So Jitana's daughter had persistent eczema and hay fever. She was on daily steroid creams and daily antihistamines. And although they were helping, they were not, solving the problem. There was still a lot of issues. They weren't really even managing symptoms very effectively. And, there were some, I guess, things that were being missed. First of all, it didn't fit into a typical sort of allergy picture. And what we found by, working with and exploring Jitana and exploring sort of the health history of Jitana and her daughter is that there was an underlying histamine intolerance that was driving the eczema and the allergy symptoms. And so often when we're taking a medical approach to these sorts of symptoms, we're looking at one solution for the skin and another solution for, the congestion and the respiratory symptoms. We're not looking at, is there something that's driving both of these? And that's what we often find from a naturopathic point of view is if we dig deeper and address what's driving these things in the first place, everything improves. And histamine intolerance is really common in kids. It is often not picked up. It's often not even recognised by GPs or medical practitioners. Of course, it's well known that histamine is part of the picture when it comes to allergies. But what is often missed is that some kids, are more sensitive or intolerant to histamine. And so that can drive these sorts of symptoms, the eczema and the more respiratory hay fever, congestion type symptoms as well. So what we worked on with Jitana's daughter is we looked at reducing histamine load. Now, anyone who has looked into histamine intolerance or has been given a histamine intolerance sort of plan will know that that there's a lot of foods that contain high levels of histamine, and these foods can really exacerbate and trigger allergy symptoms. So reducing that histamine load while not going into extreme restriction does require a bit of balance, but that's, where we came from. The thing with histamine intolerance as well is, yes, the histamine exposure is causing the symptoms, but why is this child intolerant or sensitive to histamine in the first place? And we need to dig deeper into, certain elements of the gut and start to improve, enzymes and other sort of things that are happening in the gut to make that child more tolerant to histamine. So yes, although we did look at, some food restriction initially, our goal is always to get those foods back in the diet by improving the way the body responds to the foods or the, environmental triggers that are causing the symptoms or are triggering the immune system. So we're always looking at improving gut health, and there's also certain nutrients that can be really helpful in terms of increasing or supporting the production of an enzyme that breaks down histamine as well. So it is a very holistic approach. And, often there is some nervous system and just general immune support in the mix as well. And this can look, like certain herbal supplements or nutritional supplements, sometimes homeopathics can be helpful there as well. And so what we experienced, or what Jitana and her daughter experienced, it was definitely a bit of a roller coaster, a bit of up and down, but certainly eczema settled, the hay fever symptoms really settled. the use of steroids and antihistamines became really rare because they just weren't needed anymore. And remember, when we first started helping Jatana and her daughter, she was requiring daily steroids and antihistamines, and they weren't even managing the symptoms. So she wasn't needing those steroids or antihistamines anymore because the immune system was less reactive. We managed to introduce the foods successfully without them causing, the symptoms they were initially causing. And Mum just felt much more clear and confident in terms of moving forward, because it can be really a lot to process, a lot to take on mentally when there is this substance, histamine, that is in a lot of foods, a lot of healthy foods, fermented foods and things like that are very high in histamine. So you might be giving your child, ferments thinking that it's going to help with their allergies, and they're getting worse. And that can be, a bit of a red flag for histamine sensitivity or histamine intolerance, is when things like fermented foods are triggering symptoms and making symptoms even worse. So I think the key takeaway from this story is that, it's not so much what the immune system is reacting to. That is a piece of the picture, but it's more looking at the immune function in general and the gut health and gut microbiome diversity and those sorts of things to address those imbalances that have caused the immune system to become so reactive in the first place, particularly, when it comes to histamine in this case. And so Jatana recently shared some feedback with us that I just want to read a part of as well. She said, "Thank you so much for helping my daughter. Actually, we just did her environmental allergens blood test, and over the last 3 years, dust mite level has gone from 55 down to currently 3. Wow." And then she's also said, "Still no eczema flares either. Thank you. Her quality of life has improved a lot. She's loving trying different foods she hasn't been able to have in a long time." So that is just so much load, so much mental load off for that family, knowing that her body is in a better place to sort of respond to the different things that life throws at us, right? So that is Jatana and her daughter's story. I want to move on to a story about eczema. So this was a little baby infant that we supported, and already for this little girl, cow's milk protein allergy had been diagnosed. So this is a really good example of that's not the end of it, So cow's milk protein allergy was diagnosed. Dairy had been removed from the diet. And what was expected to happen was that the eczema, so this little girl had quite, severe eczema on her body. They expected that with the removal of that cow's milk protein allergy, that's how it was diagnosed in the first place because of the eczema. So they did the test and it was diagnosed, cow's milk protein allergy. But what happened was the eczema did not resolve. So dairy had been completely removed from the diet, but the eczema was still there. And so what this story illustrates is that removing that dairy addressed one trigger. And of course, it's important to remove that dairy because there is an actual, diagnosed allergy to cow's milk protein. But what isn't addressed when dairy is just removed from the diet is what's going on with the gut, what's going on with the immune system, what's going on with the skin barrier. And so that's what we focused on. We sort of broadened the focus to let's focus on the gut microbiome, let's focus on immune regulation, let's focus on getting those important nutrients in for skin repair and skin barrier support, really looking beyond that single sort of diagnosis. And it wasn't a lot of time. I can't remember exactly how long it was, but it was, weeks rather than months and months. eczema started to settle, and parents were feeling much more confident about what they could feed this child. And, another pathway could have taken them down the route of just, let's try, removing this food, and let's try removing that food, and let's try removing this food. And sometimes that is necessary. Sometimes kids with allergies have, one allergy is diagnosed, but then there might be other allergies or intolerances that aren't diagnosed. And allergies are much easier to get a diagnosis for than intolerances. Intolerances and sensitivities can be really muddy and murky to figure out. And a lot of kids with diagnosed allergies will also have some sensitivities and intolerances. So when we're working on these things, gut microbiome health, gut microbiome diversity, which is really important, which basically means lots of different species of healthy bacteria within the gut. When we're looking at how the immune system is reacting and responding to things within the environment or foods, we can really reduce the likelihood of going down that route of more and more allergies, intolerances, sensitivities being diagnosed, and kids having a very limited diet, because that can then cause issues as well. That can be necessary short term, while we sort of, address the gut and immune health. And then, the idea is always over time to be diversifying the diet, because we know that diversity in the diet, lots of variety in the diet, is important for gut microbiome diversity. And so we don't want kids to be on really restrictive diets. Yes, sometimes it's necessary short term, but I think Marley's story is a really good example of, yes, there's an allergy diagnosed, but that's not the full picture. And let's look at optimizing gut microbiome health, optimizing the immune regulation, the way the body's responding to, perceived threats, if you like, and sort of go from there. And of course, that skin integrity is really important as well. So the final story that I want to share with you is something that I think a lot of parents will relate to. And this is a story of a little girl called Ruby, and she is in the sort of toddler years, sort of 3, maybe a little bit older, 3, 4, at the time that we were supporting her. And what was going on for her is the parents were really overwhelmed, because they were sort of noticing that she was reacting to certain foods in the diet, removing those foods from the diet. Symptoms would improve for a little while, and then they would come back, but more around a different food. And so that food was removed from the diet. So the parents were overwhelmed, feeling like they had to remove more and more foods, and there were more and more food intolerances developing that they had noticed, not that had been diagnosed. And, they were like, where do we go from here? This child was also a very fussy eater, had quite a few digestive symptoms, like uncomfortable tummy symptoms, wind, irregular bowels, bloating. She was also underweight, and she had been sick a lot in the past, and she'd been on a lot of antibiotics. And that was sort of one of the clues that we took note of, is that her gut microbiome had potentially been, negatively affected by all the antibiotics she'd been on in her short life. So that's where we started. We started on working on improving that gut microbiome diversity. We rebuilt that gut microbiome health with supplements and with foods. There was also, I guess you would say, a fragile digestive system and immune system. So yeah, tummy was often uncomfortable, and she was sick a lot. So that immune resilience wasn't there, and that can be, somewhat caused by or contributed to by, a sort of history of antibiotic use as well. So really what was going on here was food reactions were the symptom, but they weren't the cause. So removing more and more foods is not really going to get us anywhere in terms of making this child healthier and robust. And the pediatrician had noted that he was pretty concerned about her weight. She was a tiny little thing and just not very resilient. So we rebuilt that gut microbiome health. We focused on gut microbiome diversity. We focused on improving digestive processes generally, giving overall gentle gut support without, the elimination diets. And what happened over time, and again, it didn't take a lot of time for this child to sort of have a big turnaround, is that she actually started accepting and tolerating more foods in her diet. So, there's often this link between fussy eating and kids being really picky and them having, an uncomfortable tummy, because they sort of don't want to eat. Not that it comes out, not that they articulate it this way, but they avoid eating or, stick to really safe sort of foods because they don't want to be in discomfort. And so as we started improving digestive function and her tummy became happier, she started accepting a wider variety of foods and tolerating a wider variety of foods. And then, of course, her weight started improving as well. A lot of kids with this sort of picture also just don't have much of an appetite because their digestion is, really not working all that well. It's quite, fragile, if you like. So her appetite improved, her weight improved, her immunity improved. She was getting sick less often. And all of this really reduced a lot of stress that was being felt by the whole family. There was lots of days off childcare, days off work, more trips to the doctor, more scripts of antibiotics. And the parents knew that they wanted they were looking for a different way. They didn't just want another course of antibiotics, but at the time, they felt like that was the only way to get through this next bout of sickness. So I think the takeaway from this story is that when we build up that gut resilience, that gut microbiome health, the gut microbiome diversity, which is so important, the immune system and digestive system stop being so overreactive. And so it leads to foods being more well tolerated. And when I know that I've talked a bit about gut microbiome diversity, and I've got loads of episodes on the gut microbiome in our vault, in our past podcast episodes. But one thing that I do want to mention here is there's lots of reasons within our modern diet, lifestyle, environment, why kids' gut microbiomes become, less diverse, if you like, and improving that diversity, improving the amount of different beneficial species of bacteria that a child has within their gut microbiome has many positive outcomes on a child's health when it comes to allergies, when it comes to eczema, but also when it comes to things like mood, sleep, behavior, learning, immune resilience, as well as immune reactivity. So there's so many positive outcomes from looking at having that focus on gut microbiome diversity. So I hope you were inspired or maybe felt like your child fits into one of those categories, or maybe your child doesn't fit into one of those categories, because there's so many different ways that eczema and allergies can present. And there's so many different things that we can focus on to build up, that allergy tolerance and, the way a child responds to things that they shouldn't react to, foods in their diet, and substances in their environment. And what I also hope that you have gained from this episode is hope that there are other things that you can be doing rather than managing symptoms, eliminating foods, getting another script for another medication. There are different things and different approaches that we can take to eczema and allergy kids. And we are thrilled, to have the pleasure of working with families and supporting families in these areas. So I would love to hear from you. Send me a message on Instagram over at Natural Super Kids if you resonated with this, if you would like our support to, help your child with eczema and allergies. You can reach out either on Instagram or you can email us support@naturalsuperkids.com, and we can let you know how we can help. Thanks so much for listening, and I will be back next week. We are changing gears. We're going to be moving away from talking about eczema and allergies into a new series. I'm going to leave it at that. But stay tuned, and I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.